Hello everyone and welcome to another one of my IT tutorials. Today I'm going to show you how to configure and install Exchange Server 2010. So let's get started. So first thing first is you want to start with a fresh machine and you want to install absolutely all updates that there are before doing anything else. Now the next step in the process is configuring the server name. So Exchange server always has to be part of the domain. So you need to set up your domain first before setting up Exchange. And you need to pick proper computer name or server name for it. So for example, if your internet facing host name is mail.itsupportme.com, for example, you might want to call your Exchange server mail and then join the domain itsupportme.com. The reason for that being, if you have your actual computer name different than the host name that allows users to reach your Exchange server from outside, you'll have to purchase a SSL certificate with alt names instead of just a single name certificate, which can be more pricey. So in our case, let's just call the computer Exchange, and that's going to be our internet facing the host name from the internet will point to this computer, will also be Exchange, and our domain is, in this case, sandbox.itsupportme.com. And now let's join the domain. Alright, and now let's do a quick restart because that's what needs to be done after you join server to a domain. And I'll be right back. And we're back now that we're part of the domain. Let's log in into our domain. Alright, now the final step before installing Exchange is setting up prerequisite roles and installing some required software from the internet. So we'll start with roles. So let's open the server management console, and here you right click on features. I'll let it load for a little bit. Notice guys, this is a virtual machine, so it might be a little slow. Your server should be faster in general. Alright, so what we want is net framework, not everything. We want just net framework, and then we want RPC or HTTP proxy, and that requires IIS, so we just hit the add required features. And for net framework we actually also need HTTP activation, and that also requires IIS, so we add that. We need remote server administrative tools. So here is a choice that you'll have to make. If your Exchange server is going to be installed on the same computer as your Active Directory, which is really not a recommended setup, you should always have your Active Directory separate from Exchange server. But if it is, then you don't have to pick this. If it's not, and it's a separate server, then you have to install Active Directory remote management or administration tools, and that is located in here. And you want just this one, the snap-ins and command line tools. Remember, not this, not ADLDS, ADDS. This is for low-level domain services or something like that. And then we hit next. Then we're going to go to the role services that we're installing. And here we leave everything by a lot of things by default, and we want ASP.NET, and we just hit add required features, and then we need basic authentication and Windows authentication and just authentication. Then you might want all kinds of content compression or both of them, and the most important one is installing all of the IIS 6 management compatibility. For some reason, Exchange Server, well, or at least earlier versions of Exchange Server, I mean prior to any service packs, had problems when IIS 6 management stuff were not installed. So just to be on the safe side, install them. Right, then hit install, and while that's doing, we need to actually activate one of the services manually. So we go to Administrative Tools, Services, and here you want to find net.tcp port sharing, and it's disabled by default, so you want to go to Properties and set it to Automatic and hit OK here. Alright. Also note that after installing Net Framework 3.5.1, there will be more updates available from Microsoft for it, but those are not really important for our Exchange Server installation. You can install them at a later time whenever you feel comfortable. Of course, you should always install updates, that's out of the question. But the updates that are required are everything for Windows without any roles and features. So you want to install those before starting any of this. Alright, now another thing that we need is called Office System Converter Filter Pack. And what that helps us do, or what that helps Exchange do, is index the content of attachments like Word documents and Excel files, so that when a user searches for some kind of mail, Exchange is able to search within those files. Otherwise, without the filter pack, that would be impossible. And Adobe actually has its own filter pack that it developed for Exchange, so if you work extensively with PDF files containing text that might need to be searched through email, you might be interested in downloading and installing that as well. But the Office filter pack is required by Exchange, so we're just going to do that. And I'll put the link in the description for you to click, but here I'm just going to type it in. Download en details ASPX ID equals 17062. Right, and of course you always need to download just the one which corresponds to your system type. In my case, I'm installing Exchange 64-bit and I have a 64-bit system, so that's the one I need to download. And of course I'm in a protected IE mode, so I can't download it. Alright guys, I'll get back to this as soon as I'm done installing the features and roles. Alright, just hold on for a sec, I'll be back when this is done. Alright guys, it's done installing, and actually it doesn't even require us to restart with all these features installed. So just hit close. And one more thing I want to point out to you guys: if you're setting this up using an account that is not an administrator, I mean administrator, exactly, administrator, not a domain administrator or some other account, then you'll have to grant your account certain permissions, or it has to be added to one of the predefined groups in a domain. And the group that I'm talking about is the enterprise admins and schema admins. So if I was, for example, not an administrator user, or I was any other user, I would have to be a member of both of those groups in order to be able to install Exchange. Just a heads up. In my case, I'm like I mentioned before, I'm an administrator, so I have absolute all rights. Alright, so let's just disable IE security mode, set it to off. Now we should be able to download all the stuff that we want. Okay, let's run IE again. And I copied that link before, so let's paste it. And maximize. Now let's download again. Alright. And run. And we can close that. And we can actually close the server management console as well. So we just hit next here. And next here. And shouldn't take too long. So while it's installing, let's just open up computer. I have CD. Well, I have an ISO mounted to my virtual disk. So we'll just open that up and start the setup. It should have been mounted. Hold on. Alright, that completed, and now the ISO is mounted, so let's start the setup. And as you can see, we already installed that, so we just pick a language and install only the languages that are already on the CD, and then we start the setup. Alright guys, here we go, the setup has started. So we hit next, and of course, as always, there's a license agreement, and this is up to you. I like to enlist in all the error reporting and stuff. And you can just pick a typical installation. It has all the required stuff that we need. So organization name might be insignificant and doesn't really appear anywhere, but the important part about it is stored in the mail database. So what happens is, if your domain and your exchange absolutely crashes and the only thing you have is your file which contains all the mail, the only way you can actually recover it is if you set up a new exchange server and you have to give it the same exact organization name as the one that was stored in the mail database file. Otherwise you won't be able to mount that file to the new exchange server. Yeah, I had to find it out the hard way. So anyhow, we're just gonna call it sandbox because it doesn't really matter. And hopefully you have enough backups not to have your exchange and domain completely crash unrecoverably, because if that happens you have much bigger problems than just recovering some emails. Alright, now this, if you have 2003 Outlooks running in your organization, or you want to provide the service to people on the internet and they might be running any Outlook, you either pick yes or no. We'll pick no. Internet facing, this is of course for the purposes of having people from outside of your organization, aka the internet, being able to access your exchange server. So since, as you remember, we give our exchange server name exchange, so we're just gonna make our internet facing host name the same. So it's gonna be exchange, and our domain was sandbox.it, supportme.com. And this way we only need one certificate without any alt names. So now it's ready to run pre-checks, and everything should pass if you followed all the steps so far. And sometimes it takes a while, so I'm just gonna be back when it's all done. Alright, here we are, and it is just a warning since we didn't have any exchange servers in our domain before. It says it's gonna prepare our Active Directory to run with Exchange server, and everything else passed. So we hit install, and once again we wait and wait and wait, and it takes forever. And well, once again I'll be back when it's done, and then we'll go into configurations. And we're back. As you may have noticed, it took quite a bit of time, and once again that's because it's a virtual machine, but nevertheless. Now hit finish. And one thing I did forget to mention is some weird thing that was happening with memory configuration. In one of my Exchange servers, I installed it on a 4 gigabit machine for RAM, 4 gigabit of RAM. And what happened later is, after I increased the RAM, Exchange stopped working completely. Services just wouldn't start, and I have no idea why. So as soon as I changed the memory back to 4, it worked just fine. So maybe didn't do any additional research. Maybe Microsoft fixed that in the service packs, or maybe it was related to the fact that it was a virtual machine. But anyhow, just something to keep in mind if you're experiencing a problem that Exchange doesn't start at all, then check that you didn't change the memory after the original installation. So as you notice here, I click this link, get critical updates from Microsoft Exchange, and that just opens Internet Explorer on this page. Just check this box and hit next, and just use recommend settings, I guess, or you can change it later if you want. Let's just update something in the Windows Update for it to receive Exchange updates. So while that's doing its thing, let's get started with setting up Exchange. So basically what you do is you just go one thing at a time, and you configure the settings that you need for your organization. I'm just going to go through some of the important settings to get you started. And also, you'll need to activate your Exchange. You have 120 days free trial, and then you need to provide activation key. And in case you don't know where to provide it, because it was a bit tricky, you click on the server configuration, and then you click on the server node, and then you can enter private key right here. But let's start with the organization configuration. Right, so expand that and click mailbox. Basically, this has all things you need to know and do with your mailbox database. You can put it in a different location if you want. Configure retention policy, configure custom folders, address books, and stuff like that. Client access, just some defaults for people to access Exchange from the internet. But the most important thing is the hub transport, because that's what does all the receiving and storing. So remote domains, this defines which domains your Exchange will send emails to. Of course, if it is if your Exchange server is going to be used for your organization to communicate with the entire world, you would just leave it as a star domain. If you want to limit your organization to just emailing within your organization or to the related companies and other Exchange servers of other organizations, then you would specify those related organizations' domains here, and then the Exchange will only send emails to those domains. Accepted domains, this tab specifies for which domains this Exchange server is responsible for. So if somebody sends an email to this Exchange server and it matches one of the accepted domains, it will be received by this Exchange server. So in our case, if anyone sends an email to, for example, administrator@sandbox.itsupport.com, this Exchange server will accept that email. If it's for any other domain, the email will be rejected. You can also configure this as an intermediary Exchange server through the new accepted domain or new remote domain setup wizard, but that's beyond the purpose of this tutorial, so we're not going to look at it. Right, next thing is the email address policy. Basically, when you add an account to Exchange, the email address, that default email address that gets created for that account, is specified by this policy. And you can configure different policies for different organizational units within your domain, thus having a more logical email structure. So this is up to you to explore. Transport rules, this is same thing as an Outlook rules, only it works on the server side. So you can create rules that copy messages, delete messages based on various parameters. Global settings allows you to set size limits and delivery blists. Alright, the important thing that we need to set is a send connector. This is what's actually going to be doing all the sending of messages that it receives from the client. So we go to the send connector, new send connector, and just can give it, you can call it anything you want. In our case, we're going to be configuring this Exchange server to be able to email to anyone in the world. So we just call it internet, and for intention was going to be internet. And hit next. And address space, we want to be able to send to everyone, so it's going to be a star address. Hit OK, hit next. And we want to use DNS MX record because that is the standard for determining which mail server is responsible for each domain. Hit next. And then it's going to ask you to pick a server. Since this Exchange server is the only server in our domain, that's the only one we have. And then we hit new. And we're done. Hit finish. Journal rules allow you to keep track of messages and statistics. Unified messaging we're not going to go into. Alright, next thing is server configuration. Mailbox, once again, just deals with our mailbox database and stuff. Client access. Here you can configure Outlook web app. By default it is disabled, so nobody will be able to access their email over the web browser, only if they have actual Outlook set up on their PC. Now you can enable it by simply hitting this option, and usually there's nothing wrong with enabling that. And once again, the external host name should be the same as which we entered during installation. So it was exchange.sandbox.it supportme.com, and we'll just leave basic authentication and hit enable. Alright, finish. Now Exchange control panel, that's also accessed once you have Outlook Anywhere enabled, and it's just, I never really went into configuration of this because, well, there's really nothing to configure. Nothing useful that I saw, at least. Alright, so Exchange Active Sync, that's for cell phones. Offline address book, once again, this is all for clients accessing their mailboxes through a web browser. POP3 and IMAP. This allows you to enable POP3 or IMAP features of your Exchange. But notice, if you configure it here, it doesn't actually enable the service. And if you're using Exchange, most probably you don't want to use POP3 because that contradicts the whole Exchange system. Unless if your organization has people who can't use Exchange and need to use POP3 or IMAP. So anyhow, if you do need to enable these, you need to go to Services, and you have to find the corresponding service for each of these features, and you have to set it to automatic. So if we scroll down in the service list after it loads, just expand that and just click on the service and hit MI, and here we go, you can see POP3 and IMAP, and by default they are set to manual, so you'd have to set them to automatic, or I would suggest even automatic delayed start, because, well, you should always let the other primary Exchange services to start first before POP and IMAP goes online, because they won't work if the other services didn't start yet anyway. So that's that. Then Hub Transport. This is where you configure receiving, and by default, all mail goes through port 25. So if somebody from the internet or another Exchange server tries to send you an email, or your server an email, it'll go through here. And in order to accept email from any other server that is not part of your domain, which is most probably that you want to do if your organization is communicating with anyone in the world, you need to enable this option, anonymous users, and you hit apply. Otherwise, any other mail server, when sending you a message, will get a rejection of authentication required. The only reason when you would not have this box checked is if you have several organizations in your forest maybe, or you have an organizational trust, and then you can configure your and other organizations' servers to authenticate in one way or another. And here just leave ports as default. Now the other client exchange, this I think would mostly be used if a person is accessing your service via non-exchange system like POP or IMAP, and if they need to send mail, most probably their ISP is going to block port 25 from being an outgoing port. So in this case, you can provide those users with this port, which is 587. In this case, you can set it to any other port which is not blocked by ISP. Right, so and this should not have the anonymous user authentication because these are actually going to be your users, so there's no point of doing anonymous authentication here. So that you can leave as default as well. And that's all the configurations that are here. Once again, unified messaging we're not going to look at. And the last tab is the recipient configuration. This is where you actually configure all the email accounts. And by default, the user who installed Exchange has the account already here, which is administrator, me. And if we double click, we can see pretty much all account information. And if we click on email addresses, that's the default email address that was created for me. So it's administrator@sandbox.itsupportme.com, and that was based on that default email policy that we saw before. So if you have many users in your domain already, what you do is you hit new mailbox, because you have to create mailboxes for them, and you hit next, and then you click existing users, hit add, and then you can just select all the users that are listed here. If you need to add all of them, hit OK, and thus create mailboxes for all of those users. If you need to add a new user, there's two ways that you can do it, either through this interface, or you can add them to your domain first, set them up, and then use the existing user once again to link it to Exchange. Alright, we're going to cancel that. That's it for setting up the Exchange Management Console. But now we need to look at some of the other things like port forwarding. So your Exchange needs to receive traffic from outside on ports 25, port 80, and port 443, because those are the three ports that it works on. So if your Exchange is not internet facing and you have a gateway in between, you would have to configure a gateway to forward port 25, 80, and 443 to your Exchange server. Notice that also prevents you from running a website behind the same IP address, because websites also use port 80 and port 443, so that means you need a static IP address dedicated just to your Exchange server. That's first. Now second, we can configure some of the aspects of IIS, and that's actually how you can request a certificate for your Exchange server as well. So let's open IIS Management Console, and we expand this, and if you take a look under certificates, Exchange creates a default certificate for itself. So here you can use create a certificate request and request your own certificate for the server. Now next, it's default website, and what you might want to do is enable HTTP redirect from the root folder, because if we do this, for example, we will try to access the default directory of localhost. Of course we get a certificate error, but if we override that, we see this, which is not what we want. We want users, whenever they type in our external hostname for Exchange, to be redirected to their Exchange login. So what you do here is you select the default website and you go to HTTP redirect and you hit redirect here, and then you do this / and OWA, and then redirect all requests, redirect only requests to the current directory. So if somebody is already going to OWA, we don't want them to be redirected again, because that will create an infinite loop of redirection. And here, well, it's permanent. I don't know if it doesn't really matter. And then you hit apply. And now, if somebody visits your Exchange server, they'll be automatically redirected to the OWA. And there we go, our Exchange login screen. Now, if we were to type our username and password, this brings us to our inbox. And from the inbox, you'll probably be able to send mail because, well, outgoing port 25 on the server usually works, but you won't be able to receive mail until you configure the MX records. And MX records, well, they're quite simple. A simple Google search will reveal that, but I'm sure I'll make a tutorial about DNS at some point, and there I will talk about configuring the MX records, of course. But it's not too complicated. I'm sure you can figure it out. And there we go. We have an Outlook pretty much identical to an Outlook interface directly via a web browser. Another thing though, if the user tries to access this without HTTPS, they just get redirected as a forbidden thing. You can override this behavior in a way, well, in a bit of different way. So let's just close this. So instead of doing this, you would put your full external URL here, and you would prepend it with HTTPS, and then you would put exchange.sandbox.itsupportme.com in my case, but since that host is not actually configured, well, actually it is, right? So we can just do that, and once again redirect all requests to this directory and hit apply. And another thing you want is if you go to SSL settings and you see this checkbox require SSL, you can uncheck that, hit apply, and now when the users try to visit the website without putting HTTPS in the front, they will still be properly redirected to the HTTPS site and presented with a login screen. And there we go, guys. Redirected to a proper location. Right, I think that about covers it. I mean, this is the very basic setup. There's a lot of things that you will learn about Exchange as you work with it and explore additional options. Feel free to ask questions. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of them, or at least there should be a lot of them, because it's a very impressive piece of software, the whole mailing servers and the way it's configured. So feel free to post your comments. I'll try to answer them in a timely fashion. I apologize in advance if I don't. But once again, thanks for watching. Likes are always appreciated, and your subscriptions as well.